This is The Heart of Darkness by Evelyn and Jackie. We are doing section 1 and we are doing comic strip. So the opening scene lays out as Marlowe is driving the Nelly down the stream. We are then introduced to the director and we are given his characteristics. Then we are introduced to two other characters, the lawyer and the accountant. Then we are introduced to kind of our main protagonist, Marlowe. Marlowe then opens up as he has sunken cheeks, a yellow complexion, and he is cross-legged, laying against a mizzen-mast, which is kind of a pillar of the ship. The next scene opens up where the boat is driving down the river and the sun is setting. Then the lighthouse is on, showing that it is now nighttime. In our next panel, we have Marlowe speaking. He is speaking, and he then says how his stories they're simple at first, but then they open up to be more diverse, and his perspectives are shown. He then talks about the Romans. The Romans play a huge part because he talks about how they are fair, they work really hard to conquer their territory and fight in harsh conditions. Our next panel shows Marlowe speaking, cross-legged like a Buddha. So you could tell he is wise. He then says mind and efficiency is what saves us from being like the Romans. He then talks about the flaws of the Romans, how they are just glorified murderers driven by sort of madness, and how they attack just because of different complexions. We then have a break from the scene, and the narrator tells us more about the scenery. He then goes on to tell a story about Friend Slavin and how he got a job opportunity, and how Friend Slavin was in an argument about two black hens. Friend Slavin got really mad. A bit more context about him: he was down the river in a village, and then he smacked the chief because him and the chief got into an argument about the black hens. Then Friend Slavin got stabbed. After that, his body was in kind of decaying in the village as everyone fled. Everyone was scared of what might come if they picked up the body or caused more commotion about the body. Marlowe then traveled, and he saw a village that kind of looked like White Sculptor, which is a white kind of cave with a black hole in the middle. He's then introduced to two women knitting. After that, he is introduced to a white-haired man that introduces him to the village. After that, he goes inside and signs a contract that the secretary gives him, and he's met with a clerk, a guy with a hat leaning over his left eyebrow. They invite him in for a drink and they talk. He's then met with the doctor, and they talk about the doctor checks up Marlowe to see if there's any madness running down in his family, to measure his cranium, as that was a common practice back then. Doctor then says how he knows Marlowe's aunt and how he hasn't had a cup of tea for a while. The language changes as the doctor says, kind of insulting Marlowe by saying, is there any madness in the family, because Marlowe mentions that he's going down the stream, and then it shifts to a normal conversation about his aunt and him having a cup of tea with his aunt.
In this first frame, Marlowe states that he felt as if he was going to be the center of the earth. This also foreshadows events later in the story when he encounters Kurtz. It also suggests that Marlowe's journey will contain a spiritual change. In the second frame, Marlowe goes to Africa because when he was young, he had a passion for the unknown. Africa was shown to Marlowe into its unknown land, but we see madness due to the gunfire towards the invisible enemies. In the third frame, Marlowe noticed the inefficiency of the station and the rusting of machinery with flies. The lusty devils are what move men to act badly, but with no deception. In the fourth frame, the chief accountant introduces Kurtz as someone talented. Marlowe admires the chief's care for his hygienic habits that contrasts and involves disciplined work, especially in the chaos of the outer station. The chief accountant is filled with a sense of powerlessness and hate that Marlowe earlier described towards the Roman conquerors of England. In the sixth frame, we see that they are trying to clear the colonial effort and isn't motivated by helping the people, but motivated by greed, as the white man showed. This frame simply allows Marlowe's guest to foreshadow the general manager's negative feeling about Kurtz, which is wanting to sink the steamboat. So Marlowe is taken to see the general manager. He is intelligent and shows leadership. Marlowe believes that the general manager holds his position in two traits: uneasiness and resistant to all the tropical diseases. The general manager is the embodiment of the pretending devils Marlowe earlier mentioned. The general manager's trait is that he doesn't die, so he is hollow. The shed bursts into flame. Marlowe approaches and sees a laborer being beaten for setting a blaze and hears the general manager talking with another man about Kurtz, saying, "Take advantage of this unfortunate event." The general manager's concern for Kurtz is faked, so he needs to save the sick Kurtz because he would ruin his image if he didn't. And he had an excuse to avoid helping Kurtz, which is the sunken steamship. Marlowe tells his story in order to try to explain how difficult it is to get across from his experiences. The narrator observes that it was now so dark that they couldn't see Marlowe. Marlowe despairs about the inability for one man to explain himself to another. So basically the novel emphasizes that this point, ironically, when Marlowe takes comfort that at least the men on the Nelly know and see him, the fact that the men actually couldn't see him at all.
The summary of Heart of Darkness is about a man named Marlowe going down the stream. The farther he goes down, the more madness he sees and notices in the world. And in his stories, such as from Frensleven, he shows that the madness overcame Frensleven as he was more in the village. He was in the village more often. And that is section 1 of Heart of Darkness.